be her son, and that I got to know her for the 15 years that I did. She said,
The paperwork moves first. No press conference, no balcony appearance, no royal wave from a palace window. Just a signature, a title, and a quiet redirection of power that most of the world never notices until it is far too late to ignore. Millions of people read one headline and picture the same image. Prince William standing inside Balmoral Castle, keys in hand, as if the Queen's most private home just changed owners overnight. That image is wrong. It was always wrong. And the real story sitting underneath it is far more interesting than the headline lets on. Here is the verified record. Balmoral and Sandringham, the two private estates Queen Elizabeth II loved most, passed to her son. King Charles III owns them now, inherited directly, confirmed, official. William did not take them. William was never in line to take them. That door closed the moment his grandmother died. So, if William does not own the Queen's private estate, why is his name attached to a headline about taking one? Because the public is watching the wrong square on the board. HI viewers, quick question before we go further. If your family suddenly lost a decades-long job with no public explanation, would you call that routine business, or would you call it personal? Drop one word in the comments. I want to see what you actually believe before I show you what the palace believes. Because while the world stares at Balmoral, the real transformation is happening somewhere quieter. In September 2022, William became Duke of Cornwall. That title did not hand him a castle. It handed him a machine, one built from land, tenants, farms, coastline, and centuries of legal structure. And it put that machine directly under his control. This is not inheritance in the simple sense. This is positioning. The Duchy of Cornwall does not exist to sit still. It exists to fund a future king, train a future king, and quietly prove to the public that a future king already knows how to run something enormous before he ever wears a crown. And somewhere inside that transition, a name connected to Queen Camilla disappears from the payroll. Nobody announced it, nobody explained it on television. But the timing lines up with the change in leadership, and once people started asking questions, the story stopped being about castles entirely. The first move was never a castle. It was never a crown. It was never a speech. It was a name that quietly disappeared from the duchy's future. A title lands on a desk in September 2022, and with it comes something far bigger than land. William becomes Duke of Cornwall, and overnight he inherits a machine that most Americans have never heard of. Yet it already shapes the future of the British monarchy in ways a castle never could. Forget the word estate for a second. Think of it as a private trust. One built centuries ago, funded by farmland, coastline, offices and rental income, and legally separated from public taxpayer money. It exists for one purpose only: to fund the official life, the charitable work, and the private life of whoever holds the title Prince of Wales, along with his household. That is what William now controls. But here is the twist that most headlines skip entirely. William does not simply own this like a mansion he can sell tomorrow. According to the Duchy's own published rules, the Duke does not hold the right to the capital assets. He cannot cash it out, he cannot walk away with it, he can only run it, shape it, and answer for it while he holds the title. That single detail changes the entire story. This is not William collecting a private fortune to enjoy in silence. This is William being handed a test. Every farm he manages, every tenant he houses, every environmental target he sets, becomes a preview of how he plans to run something even larger one day, the monarchy itself. Americans understand this instinctively once you frame it correctly. Picture a powerful family business, passed down for generations, where the heir does not just inherit the money, he inherits the responsibility to prove he can run it better than the man before him, in full view of shareholders who never signed a single agreement but still expect a return. Except, in this case, the shareholders are the public, and the return they expect is trust, not dividends. Only this business comes with tenants who vote, journalists who investigate, environmental groups who watch, and a public that judges every decision in real time. So, while the world debates whether William took something from the late Queen, the far more important question sits quietly in the background. What is he doing with the machine he already controls? And what does he plan to remove from it along the way? Because the most revealing part of William's rise inside the duchy was never about what he gained when the title landed on his desk. It was about what he chose to stop carrying forward from the era before him. Long before William ever held the title, another man spent decades shaping that same land into something personal. King Charles III did not treat the Duchy of Cornwall like paperwork, he treated it like an identity. For more than 50 years as Prince of Wales, Charles used the duchy to build the causes people now associate directly with him. Organic farming before it was fashionable. Sustainable architecture before most people used that word. Environmental warnings decades before the rest of the world caught up and started listening. This was not a side hobby. This was where Charles quietly practiced becoming the kind of king he wanted to be, long before he ever wore a crown. That long, personal relationship with the duchy also shaped who got close to him. Enter Queen Camilla. For years, Camilla existed on the outside of public affection, remembered by much of Britain and America as the reason a fairy tale marriage collapsed. But relationships shift. Public opinion shifts slower, but it shifts. Over time, Camilla moved from outsider to accepted partner, and eventually to Queen Consort, standing beside Charles at his coronation. As Camilla's position solidified, so did her family's proximity to the world Charles had built. That is where Annabel Elliott enters the story. Camilla's sister, an interior designer by trade, became connected to Duchy of Cornwall properties during the Charles era, according to public reporting. Her work reportedly touched the kind of restoration and design projects that reflected Charles's personal taste. The same taste he had spent decades refining across farmhouses, gardens, and historic buildings under his control. None of this was hidden, none of this was scandalous on its own. Family members working alongside royal relatives is not new, and it is not automatically improper. Palace-adjacent design work has existed for generations, quietly, without controversy. But it does mean that when leadership changes hands, the people sitting closest to the old regime become the easiest to notice once the room rearranges itself, and the room was about to rearrange completely, because Charles was never going to run the duchy forever.
The right cheek, then touches the crown.
Queen Elizabeth II's death in September 2022 did not just create a new king, it triggered a domino effect through every title beneath the crown, and one of those dominoes landed directly on William's desk. Charles moved upward, out of the duchy and into the monarchy itself, carrying decades of habits and loyalties with him. William moved into the very seat Charles had shaped for half a century, inheriting the land, but not the obligation to run it the same way. And suddenly, the old room, the one built slowly across decades of personal taste and quiet loyalty, had a completely new owner sitting at the head of the table. A name quietly drops off a payroll list, and nobody in the press notices for months. According to reporting from People magazine, Annabel Elliott, Queen Camilla's sister, was not brought back onto the Duchy of Cornwall's roster for the 2023 to 2024 year, after years of involvement in interior design work tied to the Charles era. No press release, no public statement from the palace explaining the decision in detail, just an absence where a name used to be. Let's be exact about what is confirmed and what is not, because this is where most coverage gets sloppy. What is confirmed, according to public reporting, is that Elliott was not retained going forward, and that the stated reason offered was simply that her work had been completed. What is not confirmed is intent. Nobody inside the palace has said William removed her out of anger, rivalry, or personal conflict with Camilla's side of the family. That claim does not exist in any verified record, and this script will not manufacture one just to make the story louder. But here is where the chess analysis begins, because in a royal institution, silence is never neutral. Reading 1, the simple version. This is routine estate management, contracts end, projects finish. A new duke reviews existing arrangements and makes independent decisions. Completely ordinary in any large organisation. Reading 2, the sharper version. Royal commentators have suggested that this may reflect something larger than a single-ended contract. It may represent William drawing a clear line between his own working style and the private arrangements that defined his father's decades running the same estate. Reading 3, the human version, the one nobody at the palace will confirm on record. If you are Camilla's family, watching a role connected to the Charles era quietly end right as William takes control, it is difficult not to feel the timing as a message, whether or not one was ever intended. Notice what the narration is not claiming. It is not claiming Camilla's family exploded in fury behind closed doors. It is not claiming William personally signed a termination letter out of resentment. It is not claiming a single private word was ever exchanged between the two households. Those details do not exist publicly, and inventing them would turn analysis into fiction. What can be said is this: timing in royal life is rarely accidental, and optics move faster than official statements ever do. And if that was the first piece quietly removed from the board, the next move William made was far bigger than decoration. Cornwall's tenants start noticing something different almost immediately. New mental health support programs appear. New conversations about affordable housing begin. New environmental targets get attached to farms that had operated the same way for generations. This is not a rumour. This is the Duchy of Cornwall's own published direction under its new duke. Since taking the title in September 2022, William has pushed the duchy toward measurable, public-facing goals, net zero commitments, tenant welfare programs focused on mental health, direct partnerships with local organisations tackling homelessness across Cornwall. These are not private passion projects hidden from view. They are published, promoted, and clearly designed to be seen. And that is the real difference between William and his father. Charles ran the duchy through relationships, restoration, and personal taste, built slowly across 50 years. His version of leadership was intimate, rooted in craft, architecture, organic farming, and long friendships with the people who helped build his vision. It was personal in every sense of the word. William's version looks almost the opposite. Cleaner, more structured, more corporate in tone, built for headlines, reports, and public accountability rather than private loyalty. Royal commentators have suggested this reflects a broader strategy, not simply a change in personality. A modern monarchy, according to this reading, cannot survive on charm and tradition alone. It needs measurable results the public can point to and defend. This is where the audience has to make a choice, because both readings hold up under scrutiny, and neither one can be dismissed as simply wrong. One reading says, William is protecting the institution itself, cutting away the kind of quiet, cosy, family-adjacent arrangements that make a monarchy look outdated and impossible to justify to a sceptical public watching every expense. The other reading says, William is not protecting anything. He is simply clearing out people connected to Camilla's era, because they represent a version of royal life he does not want attached to his own reign. Neither reading requires William to be cruel. Neither reading requires Camilla's family to be innocent victims either. Reasonable people watching the same facts can land in two completely different places, and royal commentators genuinely disagree on which explanation fits better. What nobody disputes is the direction William has chosen. Structured, transparent on paper, focused on outcomes a newspaper can measure, rather than relationships nobody outside the family can verify. Whether that shift is wisdom or cold calculation may depend entirely on which side of the estate you were standing on when the change arrived. But the transformation did not stop at the farmland and cottages of mainland Cornwall. One piece of William's estate sits far offshore, quiet, historic, beautiful to look at, and, as the next chapter reveals, far more politically loaded than almost anyone watching from the mainland ever realises. 28 miles off the coast of Cornwall, the tide pulls back from more than 200 islands, islets and bare granite rocks, and almost nobody watching the royal headlines back home has any idea this place belongs to the same story. This is the Isles of Scilly, England's only true archipelago. And according to the Duchy of Cornwall's own published history, these islands have belonged to the duchy since the very beginning of the 14th century, centuries before anyone alive today was born, and centuries before the phrase royal scandal ever existed. This is the offshore twist, not a hidden bank account, not a secret shell company buried in some tax haven nobody can trace. Something far more real, and in some ways far more revealing, an actual offshore royal territory, sitting quietly under William's control the moment he became king. Picture the scale of what that means. William is not simply managing hedgerows and farmhouses on the mainland. He is responsible for island communities, for people who live, work and raise families across a stretch of Atlantic coastline most Americans have never heard mentioned on the news, let alone connected to the British royal family. Housing pressure exists there, the same way it exists across much of coastal Britain. Tourism drives the local economy, which means every decision William makes about development, conservation or land use directly touches families who have lived on these islands for generations, long before any duke ever held the title, and long before anyone imagined those decisions would end up discussed in a video like this one. Environmental stakes sit high too. Rising sea levels threaten low-lying coastline. Fishing communities depend on careful, sustainable management from the very estate that technically owns the ground beneath their homes. Which means William's choices here carry weight far beyond public relations. This is the part the headline never mentions. The story was never only about one removed name connected to Camilla's family. It was never only about castles that already belonged to King Charles. The real story is a future king learning, in real time and far from the cameras of London, how land, money, public trust and reputation all connect across an empire of scattered coastline most people will never set foot on. Every island duke, every housing decision, every environmental promise becomes practice for a job. William has not started yet, the job of king, and every mistake made now on a remote island could still be remembered decades from now, once the crown finally sits on his head. And then in 2026, William's duchy dropped a number so large it turned quiet estate management into something that looked unmistakably like a royal power statement. A number lands in 2026 that turns quiet estate management into a public statement nobody in the royal press office can walk back. £500 million. That is the figure the Duchy of Cornwall committed to invest over the next decade, according to its own published 2026 Integrated Impact Report, spread across 5 geographic heartlands under William's control. This is not pocket change for a private hobby. This is a decade-long strategy, publicly stated, tied directly to housing, nature recovery, farming, renewable energy, net zero targets, and long-term resilience for the communities living across the Duchy's land. Read that list again, because every word on it is deliberate. Housing speaks directly to a cost of living crisis families across Britain feel every single month. Nature recovery speaks to a generation of voters who care about climate outcomes more than any generation before them. Local economies speak to the exact communities William needs standing behind the monarchy once the crown eventually passes to him. Farming and renewable energy speak to a country trying to balance tradition against a future nobody can predict with certainty. This is not simply protecting an inheritance. This is William building a platform, a public record of leadership he can point to years before he ever becomes king. Compare that to the headline everyone actually clicked on: one family member connected to Queen Camilla quietly not retained on a duchy contract. A single line item, buried, unexplained, easy to notice, and impossible to verify as personal or political. Now, put both stories side by side. While public attention stays fixed on who lost a role connected to the old Charles era, the real transformation happening in plain sight is a £500 million reshaping of the entire Duchy of Cornwall, redesigned around William's priorities, William's causes, and William's version of what a modern monarchy should look like to a sceptical public. Royal commentators have suggested that this contrast is not accidental. A quiet departure draws attention. A massive, well-publicised investment plan absorbs that attention and redirects it toward achievement rather than controversy. Whether that is strategy or simply good timing remains something reasonable people can debate. What cannot be debated is the scale of the shift. This is no longer a story about one interior designer losing a contract. This is a story about who controls £500 million of future-facing investment, and what that kind of control does to a family's influence inside a royal household that answers to no boardroom but its own. And that is the exact moment the question stops being who lost a role and becomes something far heavier. Who lost influence? Somewhere inside a family gathering nobody outside the palace will ever fully describe, a name gets mentioned, and the room, according to nothing more than public speculation, goes quiet for half a second too long. Let's be completely honest about what exists in the public record and what does not. There is no verified statement, no leaked memo, no confirmed account proving Queen Camilla's family reacted with anger over the duchy decision. That version does not exist as fact, and this script will not pretend that it does. What does exist is optics, and in a royal family, optics move faster than facts ever will. Here is what the public actually sees. Annabel Elliot, sister to the Queen Consort, connected to the Duchy of Cornwall for years through design work tied to King Charles's private taste. Then a title changes hands. Then her name is gone from the roster. No scandal confirmed. No conflict confirmed. Just a door that appears to have closed right as the household changed leadership. From a public relations standpoint, that timing creates a story whether anyone intended it to or not. Consider Camilla's family's position inside this world. Close to the crown through marriage, present at state events, connected to royal properties for years, yet never protected the way bloodline succession protects William, Catherine, or their children. Proximity to power in a monarchy is not the same as permanence inside it, and royal historians have long noted how quickly that proximity can shift once a new generation takes control. Now, consider William's position. If he genuinely believes the modern monarchy must look independent, transparent, and free from the appearance of family favouritism, then removing arrangements connected to his father's private circle is not cruelty, it is discipline. But if the same decision reflects something more personal, a quiet distancing from arrangements William never fully embraced, then Camilla's side of the family becomes collateral in a succession story far bigger than one lost contract. Both versions can be true at the same time, and the palace has offered no public statement clarifying which one applies here. King Charles sits at the centre of all of it, saying nothing publicly. Husband to Camilla, father to William, monarch above them both, watching two people he loves most operate inside a system that no longer answers directly to him the way it once did. The uncomfortable question this raises is simple enough for anyone to sit with. Was William being fair, applying the same standard to everyone regardless of family ties? Or was the palace quietly signalling that Camilla's side of the family no longer holds the position it once did? Maybe neither answer is the real one. Maybe the harshest truth is quieter than anger, quieter than punishment. Nobody was fired out of revenge. They simply stopped being useful to where the monarchy is heading next. The headline promised a stolen estate. What actually happened is a succession plan, and it has been sitting in plain public view the entire time. Strip away the drama for one moment and look only at what has been confirmed. William did not seize Balmoral. He did not seize Sandringham. Those remain, without dispute, King Charles's inherited property. What William did was take full control of the Duchy of Cornwall, modernise its priorities, commit £500 million toward a public-facing decade of investment, and, according to public reporting, decline to retain one contract connected to Queen Camilla's family. None of those individual facts sounds like a scandal on its own. Together, they sound like something far more calculated, something closer to a strategy than a coincidence, and something that looks entirely different once you stop watching it one headline at a time. William's real message was never "Camilla's family is finished." Royal commentators have suggested a far more precise reading. The next era of the monarchy will be structurally harder to influence through private closeness, family ties, or decades-old personal loyalty, regardless of whose relative is asking. Look at where every major royal figure now sits inside that message. Catherine, Princess of Wales, stands as the future Queen Consort, her public role increasingly built around stability, family image, and causes designed to age well under scrutiny. Prince George of Wales represents the next direct line, a child whose future inheritance depends entirely on the reputation William builds right now, years before George ever reaches the throne himself. Queen Camilla represents the present reign, respected, established, yet increasingly positioned as part of the era that is closing rather than the one that is opening. King Charles represents the transition itself, a monarch whose decades of personal relationships now sit beside a son actively auditing which of those relationships carry forward. And William represents the incoming operating system for the entire institution, because that is genuinely what this is, not simply one man replacing another man. One method of running a monarchy replacing a completely different method. Charles preserved relationships, sometimes for decades, often quietly, always personally. William audits them publicly, methodically, and, according to standards he can defend to journalists, tenants, and a sceptical public, watching every pound of that £500 million commitment. Neither approach is automatically right. Neither approach is automatically wrong. Both come from love for the same institution, expressed in two completely different languages. But only one of them is currently running the Duchy of Cornwall, shaping 5 geographic heartlands and building the financial and reputational platform William will carry directly into becoming king. In the end, the most powerful estate in this entire story was never the one surrounded by the highest walls or the oldest stone. It was the one that quietly revealed exactly who still belonged inside the future, and who had already been left standing outside it. Strip away every headline, every rumour, every half-confirmed detail, and one plain fact remains standing at the centre of this entire story. Prince William never needed to seize the Queen's private estate to change the direction of the royal family. Balmoral and Sandringham were never his to take, and they never will be. While King Charles III remains on the throne, William did not need them. He only needed the estate that was already built for him, the Duchy of Cornwall. And once he took full control of it in September 2022, everything else followed on its own timeline. A £500 million investment plan replaced quiet, personal decision-making with public, measurable strategy. A contract connected to Queen Camilla's sister quietly ended, without confirmed drama, without a verified statement of intent, yet loaded with optics nobody in the palace chose to explain. An offshore archipelago most people had never heard of. became part of a much larger conversation about housing, environment, and the responsibilities of a future king. Once all of that happened, the old atmosphere built around Charles and Camilla's decades inside the duchy began to look less permanent than anyone assumed it was. Not because William destroyed it, because William simply stopped extending it forward. That is how power actually moves inside institutions built on centuries of tradition. It rarely arrives with shouting, accusations, or dramatic confrontations behind closed doors. It arrives through a published report, a renewed contract, or one quietly left unrenewed. A title that changes hands on a specific date in September. A polite explanation that sounds completely harmless in the moment, right up until historians look back years later and recognise exactly what it signalled. Royal commentators will keep debating the intent behind every decision covered in this story, and they should, because certainty was never available here, only patterns, timing, and public record. Some will call William calculating, others will call him disciplined. Both descriptions may be describing the exact same man from two different angles. What is not up for debate is the direction those patterns point toward. A modern monarchy, built on transparency, measurable outcomes, and public accountability, slowly replacing an older monarchy built on personal relationships, quiet loyalty, and private discretion. Two families, one crown, and one estate that ended up saying more about the future of the British monarchy than any official palace statement ever did. In the end, this was not only about land, money, or one royal relative losing a role. It was about the moment Prince William stopped looking like the heir waiting outside the room and started looking like the man already moving the pieces inside it.
She's an inspirational woman to look up to, obviously on to this day, and going forward and things. It is, it's a wonderful family. The members who I've met have achieved a lot, and very inspirational.